amidst radioactive environment, in the eternal dark of the underground, at unattainable altitudes. Kazakhstan's vast lands attract numerous researchers and explorers, and our filming crew are no exception. Hello to everybody, we're on Pavlodar, and the reason for that is that we felt a breeze of great discoveries coming exactly from here. Today we want to dig deep and show the world something previously concealed about a prominent person who lived about 300 years ago. I'm talking about Sultan Sultanbek. It seems that the long-time investigation of his personality and some episodes of his life has reached its apogee. It's going to be a bomb for the scientific world, not to mention amateur historians like myself. Unknown and undoubtedly interesting, coming up in the next 15 minutes. For me, this story began only this winter. For Sultan descendant like Professor Isin of Pavlodar, it started much earlier.
Еще в детстве.
When a child, my father told me that Sultan Sultanbek was our 7th generation ancestor. I learned about some documents, correspondence between Sultan Sultanbek and the commander of the Irtysh military line. In this area, Sultan Sultanbek governed over the Kipchak Ulus. Thousands of people were under his rule. What was it like to be responsible for the common folk and protect their interests? The time was restless and disturbing. In the 18th century, the Irtysh river basin became the scene of fierce standoff between the Kazakhs and the Jungarians. Simultaneously, the Russians were building the Irtysh military line outposts and fortresses on the right bank of the river. In this very complicated military and political situation, he represented the interests of not only the Ulus that he ruled, but the interests of the Kazakh Khanate in the east and northeast of Sari-Arka in general. The all-Kazakh Khan Abylai, who acceded to the common Kazakh throne in 1771, would often travel to northeastern Kazakhstan, to the territory of the present-day Pavlodar region, to seek counsel of Sultan Sultanbek. They were cousins and, in principle, could be of similar age. The following historical fact testifies to close relations between the brothers. It is a fact that in the 40s of the 18th century, Sultan Abylai was taken prisoner by Jungars. In 1742, Sultanbek, on August 28, 1742 to be precise, takes Russian citizenship and appeals to Nepluyev to assist in freeing Sultan Abylai from the Jungarian captivity. In this case, he acted exactly as Abylai's close relative, as his cousin. Become a hostage for the brothers' freedom. It appears natural to most of us, but what does this real-life fact tell us about Sultanbek? In 1763, after the defeat of the Jungar Khanate in the east of the Kazakh Khanate, a large territory became vacant, if I may. The Chinese government grants permission to the Kazakhs to nomadize there, but only very prominent people could serve as amanat or hostage, securing the deal. Sultan Abylai sends there the father of his wife. Khan Abulmambet of the Middle Jews sends his father-in-law, Sultanbek, in the same capacity. To become a captive by the will of your people, an honor or a servitude? Hard to say. But really, what did it mean to be an amanat in those days? What were the conditions of his accommodation there? What did he do there? We don't know exactly. The only Orientalist who describes amanat cases and how those persons were accommodated is Ms. Kafizova. It was almost like hosting an honorable guest on the territory of China.
Do you
mean amanat persons were provided estates? Yes, they enjoyed the most comfortable treatment and accommodation. The only condition was that during complicated negotiations, they had to stay with the hosting party, so to say. They would have a separate dwelling and could live in yurts if they wanted. They could have cattle and would receive valuable gifts. Upon release of his amanat duty, Sultanbek returns to his regular affairs and once again asserts himself on the political arena to leave a mark in history. After returning from the honorary Chinese captivity, Sultanbek asks the Russians to build him a permanent residence. With this very careful, smart and very much diplomatic move, the Kazakh rulers managed to vest their title to the land on the right bank of the Irtysh River. He secured the right to eternal nomadic migration off the right bank of the Irtysh. As per the imperial orders of 1788 and 1798, that is, a decade later, the Kazakhs were awarded 2 large permits to nomadize there and stay there as per the so-called right to eternal migration. That meant no restrictions and no taxes. The land of the Irtysh's right side is within the borders of the modern-day independent Kazakhstan. Sultanbek is the one to take merit for that. If you're interested in how sultans lived in the 18th century and what their houses looked like, then we are heading in the same direction. It looks like Sultanbek's residence was situated close to Pavlodar, so let's do it. We found the plan of the Sultan's house in Omsk archives. Here are the front or bright rooms, as they were called. The plan is in good shape and it is scaled. By the way, according to the plan, the house was supposedly located close to the Half Lighthouse. No other landmark, unfortunately. Could you help us with it? It is worthy of note that the search for Sultanbek's residence brought together knowledge and enthusiasm, experience and passion of several amateur researchers. Vitaly Sirik lives in Pavlodar and is fond of the history of these edges and everything related to it. Timur Smagulov is an experienced scientist and a prominent professional archaeologist in the region. No historical event or artifact is able to hide from his keen eye. In many respects, the Irtysh floodplain can be called a terra incognita. Up until now, the archaeologists have studied it, and in some areas it can be up to 20 kilometers wide, very poorly. Our expedition to the village of Kenja-Kol has been investigating the burials of Kimako-Kipchak period for several years already. We found a lot of very interesting artifacts dating back to the Kimak Khaganate, including burials of medieval soldiers and the so-called Kimak chariot, one of the finds of the last year. In other words, if we are able to locate the Sultan's residence, we will also find something else even more ancient, because the best and most interesting places in river valleys, as a rule, would be populated much earlier. As a rule, such sites have several layers to them. So do the documents that you were able to find in the archives say anything about the location of that lighthouse? Unfortunately, it appears that the place was so popular and familiar that there was no need to identify its location. They just say Half Lighthouse. Ethnographic materials, archaeological observations and historical sources tell us that during the pre-industrial period, the population of the Irtysh River basin primarily concentrated in the floodplain. So from the point of view of a person living in the 18th century, it makes sense to look for both the Half Lighthouse and Sultanbek's residence somewhere in the Irtysh floodplain.
Из архивных источников известно, что в районе города Павлодара.
Based on archival sources, we know that Sultan Muhammad's estate was located near the city of Pavlodar, and his nomadic winter houses were located close to Zhelezinsk fortress. Thus, one of the key tasks of our archaeological expedition is to try to identify the geographical location of his residence. Why is this of such great interest to us? Well, most importantly, because if we manage to do this, we will get a clear idea of day-to-day life in those times, backed with artifacts. I mean, how our people lived 300 years ago, their migration routes, cultural and political centers, etc. All this is still unknown to science. We are in the initial phase of this exciting research and journey. The document with the house plan says that initially the house was 8 verstas or Russian old-time miles away. So we just need to know in which direction to measure. Here's the river station, and this is exactly the place where The Koryakovsky outpost was located. Now let's go 7 miles up the river.
Попробуем отложить искомые 7 километров.
So let's try to measure the 7 kilometers, which are different from verstas and miles, but for our purposes it should be okay. The place that we're looking for should be somewhere in this square. The longest bridge in Central Asia. It was commissioned in late 2016. It extends for more than 12 kilometers. Nearly 2,000 people took part in its construction. 700 pieces of equipment worked here in the course of 3 years. 13,500 tons of metalwork and 150,000 cubic meters of concrete had been used. Its capacity is 10,000 cars per day. Will we be able not to lose any of the details amidst this massive structure? Sultanbey's residence is waiting to be discovered. Here come the archaeologists. Meanwhile, we decided to try to recreate the appearance of our main character. On the one hand, only one image of Sultanbey survived to our time. On the other hand, there are plenty of written descriptions by travelers who came to visit the ancient ruler on different occasions. In his diary, Bartones says that he looked about 60 years old, that he had a thin black beard, had good manners and was always properly and neatly dressed. His headpiece was made of golden threads and the outerwear was made of Chinese silk. These numerous descriptions, by the way, left behind by the heads of the Irtysh borderline, became the basis for Sultanbey's portrait. That, should my memory serve me right, was generated in the 90s of the last century. Having armed themselves with skill and imagination, as well as scientific knowledge and descendants' memories, our painters and designers decided to give it a try and create his composite image. Meyram Yestaevich, what features are characteristic of your family? Well, based on the stories of our relatives about our grandfathers, their faces were elongated, not round. They had straight noses and were dark-haired. What about the color of their eyes? Black. They were of average height, not tall and well-built. They were scraggy or corded, for lack of a better word. That was very characteristic of them. Could you describe distinctive Sultan's attire of that time? He sure had a headdress, if not helmet-like, then pointing upwards. As to outerwear, in those days, as a rule, it was produced from camel wool. They used special weaving machines to make thin woolen strings or fibers and then would use them to make unique step cloth of camel wool. I think of him as a person of society. I cannot imagine him being a man of certain temper. He should have been a person of fine nature. Most likely, he appreciated beauty and nature. I mean things made of wood and leather. Naturally, he could do something like this in his free time. It is also clear that, as any Kazakh, he loved good horses. I'm sure he had some nice stallions. In general, I like this drawing. I think it could be exposed in the museum. The archaeological reconnaissance in the floodplain of the Irtysh River has brought us good and bad news. The good news is that we probably found the location of Sultanbey's residence. The bad news is that we will not be able to start digging until the snow on the ground and the ice on the river melts away. But scientists can be patient, especially when they are convinced that from this moment, this story will only evolve.